My name is Pat Baker. I came to Cornerstone about 6 years ago, a little bit more than 6 years ago. I was raised in a religious home. We went to church every Sunday. We had lots of rules and regulations. I went to 12 years of parochial school. But God was never really present in our home. We never talked about Jesus. We never talked about anything religious. The only time the word Jesus was ever used in my home was when my father used it as an expletive. When I was 18, I left my father's home and I left religion. And I lived a pretty worldly life. I married. I had 3 kids. My husband had a good job and we had a really good life. By worldly standards, we had everything that anybody could ever want. But I always felt like there was more, that I needed more in my life. So I spent a lot of money and did a lot of things, but it never filled me. I just yearned for something else. After 9/11, I decided to go back to church, and I went back to the church of my youth, and it was pretty much the same feeling. I sat there, but I just never felt like I belonged, or like what they were telling me was anything that was going to be useful to my life. I stopped going to church for a while, and then just needed to come back, and I found Cornerstone. The first Sunday that I came there, it was a little strange. First of all, it moved fast, and the music was a little different. The big screen was a little different, but there was just something about it that I really loved. So I continued to come back Sunday after Sunday. And over the period of time, over that 6 years, I grew and I learned a little bit more. I started bringing my Bible to church with me. I started taking notes. I started reading scripture during the week. One year I set myself to reading the Bible one time in the entire year. And it started to crack and make sense to me and break through. And then about a year ago, a little bit over a year ago, when we did the Called series, I just really heard what they were saying. And on day 4, when I read about Mother Teresa's experience with a young man when she told him that he was called to do the work of Jesus, not to do what he thought he wanted to do, it just really hit home with me. And I had known for a long time that I needed to do more than I was doing, and I had known for a long time that I needed to come to Arbor Springs Nursing Home and spend some time with these residents. So the next Wednesday we did. A few of us from my small group came, and we were interviewed, and we went into the dining room where the residents were gathered, and they were told that they had a Bible study every Wednesday morning. And I think I and all the rest of us breathed a little sigh of relief, because we really didn't want to give up our Wednesday small group. We loved it, we enjoyed it, and we thought we could throw in some service on the side and then come back to our Wednesday group. Before we left that day, the head of the volunteer services told us that the woman who was doing the Bible study was no longer going to be able to do it, and asked us if we would like to take it over. And I call that my knock-knock moment. I clearly heard Jesus knock on the door of my heart, and I, for one, could not refuse him. I took it back to the group the following Wednesday. Some of the group came with me, some of the group did not, but I knew in my heart that no matter what happened, I was coming and doing this. And I did. That was in November of last year. We have come every Wednesday. Since then, we offer a Bible study, a short lesson. We visit, we love on those residents, and then before we go home, we drop a CD in the CD player and we sing with them. Now, none of us can sing, and none of us are teachers, and none of us are especially gifted in doing much of anything, but we sure do love coming here, and we sure do get more out of this than the residents do, because we're just so blessed to be able to do this. I just want to thank the church, Cornerstone Church, and the staff for bringing this to us, for teaching us and showing us that there is a better way to live, because now I have a relationship with Jesus every day of my life, not just on Sunday mornings, and that's what I was longing for my entire life. I just love these people, and Wednesday morning when I wake up, it's the same as when I wake up on Sunday morning. I say to myself, wow, it's Wednesday. I get to go to bring church to these residents, because that's what they call it. They call it church.
Man, I love Pat. I appreciate her so much being willing just to let us kind of peer into her life and share a little of her story, but especially just sharing the way that she and her little merry band of servants go out there and minister to those folks every week and give of their time and their energy and their effort. And you know what I love is when she said, we're not musicians, we're not teachers, we're not this, we're not that, we're just people who are willing to go. We were people who were obedient and said, this is a place that God has put right in front of us, a place where we can go and where we can help, and that's what they're doing. They've not made it hard. It was actually fairly simple, and I just think it was great. I appreciate her and them so much and what they're doing, and I love these videos, just reminders every week of ways that we can serve and really find our place in the Lord's will for us. So anyway, all right, well, this morning we're going to jump into a new series that we've entitled The Art of Neighboring. And I'm going to get to that in just a minute, and you'll understand why we call it that. But before I get there, let me ask you a question. Have you ever thought about where you live and why you live there? Have you ever just considered sort of that big existential question of, why do I live here? Because we could have just as easily been born in Africa or Australia or Belgium or England or Cuba or Hawaii or the Bahamas or any of those types of places. Or we could be living there right now, but we're not. We're here, right here in East Alabama, baby. And you know what? I'd like to think that we're here for a reason, that we've been specifically placed in this part of the world because God needs us to be here. And let me just throw this truth at you. Where you live matters to the purpose for which you've been created. Where you live matters to the purpose for which you've been created. We've all been given a purpose. I talk about it all the time. It's really in two directions. One is to worship and serve the Lord, and the other is to serve others. This is why we're here. This is the big design for every single one of us. It's not just about our job or our hobbies or even our family. It's to worship and serve the Lord and then to serve others. That's why we've been placed here. And it's interesting, though. I talk to people all the time who are moving to Auburn, Opelika, which, by the way, is happening at a more rapid pace, isn't it? A lot of people moving into this area. But I hear their stories, and some of them are kind of amazing, how they came from who knows where to get to right here in this part of the world. And sometimes I'll even hear people say at the end of telling me this, and I don't know how I got here, and I don't know why we're here, I know I took a job with the university, and that's what brought us here, but I don't know what in the world we're doing here in East Alabama. And it's like, well, I know why you're here. I don't know how this is going to play out, but I know that for whatever reason, God wanted you here. To come on that kind of a route to get here, God surely needs you to be right here. The Bible even says that God has placed us in specific places. In Acts 17:26, it says this: God began by making one person, and from whom came all the different people who live everywhere in the world. God decided exactly when and where they must live. Specifically, God decided this country, this state of Alabama, this area, Auburn, Opelika, and I would say even more specifically, your neighborhood, your apartment complex, wherever it is that you live, He has placed you there specifically for a reason. And so for the next several weeks, we're going to talk about this idea of why our neighbors matter in the grand scheme of us sharing and carrying out the gospel in this world. These people that live right here, right around us, are important to God, and they should be important to us. And you know what? I'm just as guilty of anybody. Of getting in my car and driving right by my neighbors, not knowing what's going on in their life or what they need, to come over here so I can help people at church. Or leaving my house, passing by my neighbors to get on a plane to go to Uganda so I can serve people. All the while, who knows what's happening right there in the house of the folks that live right next to me. Do they have needs? Are they struggling in any way? Is there some way that I could be helping them? And of course, I won't know until I go and have a conversation with them. And I think that really, even in this country, and I've heard many people lament this idea that we have lost the art of neighboring. We've lost the the front porching. You know what I mean? Like the day when people used to sit out on the front porches and wave to each other and sit down and talk and carry on a conversation, or where we'd watch out for your kids and you'd watch out for ours, or we'd carry your cat back over when they got lost, or, those kinds of things where we actually knew each other and we were in each other's lives. Like that day is just kind of moving on. Now, if you're 50 and up, I'm just guessing you can remember that day. You may have grown up in a place where you can remember, oh yeah, man, our neighborhood, we knew everybody, we loved everybody, we knew what was going on. If you're 30 and under, I'm guessing what you know are privacy fences, garages, and cell phones. And because that's really in many ways where our society has gone. We've learned how to wall off and separate ourselves from each other and not really engage in each other's lives the way that we used to. Now, I know that in some of your minds right now is your neighbor, and maybe you're thinking, you don't know my neighbor, brother. They're crazy. And I mean, Becky and I, we've had a few interesting folks along the way. I'll give you a couple of examples. When we lived in Montgomery, before I went into the ministry, we were in our first house on Johnstown Drive in Montgomery. And we had this guy that lived next to us. And great guy, nice guy, but he loved to cut his grass. I mean, that cat was on his riding lawnmower all the time. I'm like, dude, you've already cut it. But he would go out and he'd cut his grass, and every now and again, he'd just ease over and cut our grass because we didn't have anything separating our yard from his yard. Two things about that. Number one, he did a terrible job, and I'm not being mean, but if you saw what he did to our yard, I mean, like this uneven, giant crop circle looking things in our yard, like aliens landed in the neighbor, it's like, we had that kind of whole thing going on. And it was like, oh, brother, oh, man, how do you deal with not cut my yard anymore? You're so nice to do that. But then I found out, and here's number two, that brother would drink every time he got on his riding lawnmower. So he would start drinking beer over here at his yard, which looked really nice, and then by a six-pack in, he'd get over here to our yard. That's when crop circle happened. And so, good guy. But I think because of that, we just put up our own barrier between us and him. And I think he had some stuff going on in his life. But, honestly, we didn't get to know him enough to know what was going on. Fast forward, we moved to Wilmore, Kentucky, where I'm going to seminary. And we had these neighbors, and some of you have heard me talk about them before, Bobby and Diva Bottoms. I just love that name, man. Bobby and Diva Bottoms. They were original Eastern Kentucky people, original Wilmore people, even better than that. And their accent was so rough that even Southerners couldn't understand it. I mean, they would say paints. They kept saying paints for the longest time. Becky and I were like, what is she saying with the paints? She's like, paints. And I'm like, that's pants. All right, we got that one down. Write that down, pants, paints. But, man, we loved them. They were just awesome, great neighbors. We really got to know them and their kids and their grandkids. And Bobby, he was a big old tall guy, kind of had a gut and balding, and here we go with lawnmowers again. He loved to ride his lawnmower, and he would ride it downtown to the hardware store. I'm talking about no shirt, no shoes, no hat, just small shorts, and on the thing, riding down to the hardware store. There goes Bobby, okay. And he loved to take Michael, our oldest, who was about one at the time, on these rides on this lawnmower. And he called Michael Dude. So every now and again, we'd hear Bobby, Michael Dude! And so we'd send Michael out, and he'd go and then ride around and whatever. But every time Michael came back, he was all jacked up, man. He was just like, he's running around, and he's happy, and then he's crying on the ground and on the floor and everything. I'm like, what is the deal with Bobby and you? I mean, every time you come back, it's like this. And what was worse is, so I'm in seminary. Becky's a nurse working second shift, which is 3 to 11. So I'm trying to study and write papers with Michael crashing, melting down, like I can't do this anymore. So anyway, so one day I'm at the kitchen sink, and I'm looking out the window, and I can see we've sent Michael out. So I see him over there. Oh, I just love that Michael loves Bobby, and and so he gets on this, puts him up on the seat and riding lawnmower, and I'm like, look, that's just so great. Gives him his big old hat, so Michael takes his hat and squishes it down his head, and gets that ready to go. And then I see Bobby reach into his pocket, and he pulls out a dadgum Mountain Dew, cracks that puppy open, and gives it to Michael. Michael, with 2 hands, kills it, like a baby with a bottle, man. He's like, and drinks this Mountain Dew. Like 2 minutes later, throws it on the ground, and they just go, zzz, running off on the riding lawnmower. And I'm like, oh, that explains so much. Number one, why Michael is jacked up when he comes back. And number two, why we call him Michael Do. So, but we really loved Bobby and Diva and their family, and it was just this great case of really getting to know and love and appreciate our neighbors. And then fast forward to Becky and I moved to Montgomery. I'm in my first appointment at First United Methodist and living in a parsonage. And next door to us was this older gentleman named Mr. Paramore. And we got to know Mr. Paramore over time and loved him and appreciated him. He was great to the boys, shared stories with them all the time. The boys were great to him. They would throw rocks over the fence into his yard, and that was great. And then they would miraculously, magically appear back in our yard. They'd be like, oh, the rocks are back. It's unbelievable. I'm like, oh, rocks. We're throwing rocks. Okay, so I'd have to go explain to Mr. Paramore, I'm sorry about the rocks. He said, oh, it's okay. I throw them back, and they don't even know who did it. It's great. All this kind of stuff. And so we really loved and appreciated Mr. Paramore. Now, who would have guessed so many years ago that Mr. Paramore would have a grandson named Woody Paramore, who would end up at my church years later and become very influential here with our college and youth, and even with my boys. And he's sitting right back there. Who could ever imagine the influence of just a neighbor in that way, or what God has in store, the plan that he has for every single one of us? And really, Becky and I could look back over kind of our journey in life, and we could see how neighbors have impacted or shaped us in some form or fashion, and we've been put in their path, and they've been put in ours, all for a reason. Don't you agree? Would you agree with me on that? So we think that's important enough to talk about. Now, here's the deal. I want to ask you a question real quick. How well do you know your neighbors? All right, well, you don't even have to answer that. I want you to get the card that was in your chair. This card right here. Go ahead and pull that out, everybody. We're going to do a little exercise. We're going to find out how we're doing with this neighbor deal. In the very center of this card, it says, you are here. That does not mean you are at church. That means this is your house. I want you to take a pen or pencil or whatever, and I want you to write your address in the center box. Go ahead and write your address in there. Now, here's the thing. Before we even get into this exercise, let me just say this is going to hurt a little bit for some of you. You might feel a little guilty or, bad about what we're about to do. That's not the point. So if you feel that way, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that, but that's not the point of why we're doing this. So anyway, just a little disclaimer. All right, here's what we're going to do. All the boxes around where you are here represent your neighbors, and if you live way out in the country and you ain't got neighbors right next to you, just relax. Whoever's closest to you is your neighbor, so pick them. But anyway, these people represent the people who live front, back, side, caddy corner, all that kind of stuff. What we're going to do is we're going to figure out who these people are real quick. A is their name, just their name. So see if you can write the name of these people who live right around you. Ready, go. If you just landed in Auburn, you get a break, okay? I hear you out there just going, we just got here, I don't know anybody. You get 1 week. Anyway. All right, I'm going to stop you right there. You may be continuing on. That's great. B, so next is one fact about your neighbors. Not that you've seen that they rode a bike or you saw on Facebook they did something. I'm talking about because of a conversation, you know something about them, who their favorite sports team is, where they moved from, some fact like that. One fact about each of these. Ready to go. Some of you have pained expressions on your face. All right, I'm going to have to keep going here. Last one. The last one is I want you to share something more personal about them, a dream that they have in their life, something that they have a dream of doing, or big ideas or plans that they have. Share one of those about each of your neighbors. Go ahead. Somebody in the back is really struggling with it. I can't do this. So painful. All right, how are we doing so far? How's this going for you? Okay, I took this. I did not do it nearly as well as I thought I was going to do. I was like, oh, I got this. And then I started doing it. I was like, I don't got this. And here's the thing. Nationally, as this has been done around the country, 10% of the people could do A, which is just a name. Around 5% could do B, which is a fact. And around 1% could do the dream of the people that lived right around them. So really, all this proves is that we're all kind of in the same boat, you know? That maybe we need to do a little bit better job of getting to know these folks who are right around us. And honestly, we can look at these people and we can say they're either a nuisance or an opportunity. Now, I think in the Bible, Jesus would say and does say that our neighbors are our opportunity. This is where we will live out the gospel in many ways. If you have your Bibles, I want you to look with me at a passage in Mark chapter 12, verses 28 through 31. Mark chapter 12, verses 28 through 31. I'm guessing that this is a verse that probably many of us know. Jesus in here is having a little back and forth with the Pharisees. They're challenging him on some things. They're pummeling him with questions. They're trying to catch him. See if he really understands the law as they do. So I just want to pick it up here in verse 28. It says, one of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked him, of all the commandments, which is the most important? The most important one, answered Jesus, is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. So it's interesting, both the question that's presented to Jesus and the way that he answers it. You know, these Pharisees are coming to him and they're all concerned about the law. You know, that's their big deal. There's 613 laws that they're having to manage all the time. And they've even got it codified down into this, 248 positive commandments, 365 negative or prohibitions, negative commandments. And so there's always this big question in their mind of which ones are the most important, you know? Is it the positive ones or the negative ones? You know, which ones are the ones that we're really supposed to follow? And they would even weight the commandments as light and heavy, you know, or small and great. And their big deal was, if we can just obey the right commandments, then we'll get this right. If our good actions outweigh the bad ones, then God will be for us. But if it's the other way, then we're in big trouble and God won't forgive us. That's kind of how they thought about it. You see, the law, it only brought more like oppression. It never brought love and mercy and a sense of relationship, or it never was able to reconcile people to God. It was always a struggle, but this is the world that the Pharisees lived in. And so they come to Jesus and they say, Jesus, why don't you tell us, if you're such an expert, which is the most important of all of these? And I love the way Jesus answers. He says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Here's what he's doing here. Deuteronomy 6:4 is what he's quoting. It's what we call the Shema. It's the beginning of the Shema. Shema means hear and obey. The Shema was one of the most important scriptures to the Jews. They would literally have it written on small pieces of paper and put in these little leather boxes that they attached to their forehead called phylacteries. And they would wrap this leather band around their arm as a reminder of the Shema and the commandment that they've been given. So Jesus decides, I'm going to start with the most foundational part of the law that you would know very well, and I'm about to build a case for this right here. So he starts right there. And then he goes on, he says, here we go. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and all your strength. This is also part of the Shema. He starts talking about this with the word love. He doesn't even deal with the idea of law. He just starts with the idea of love. And love, here in this verse, it's the Greek word agapao, or what we might know as agape. There are three types of love in the New Testament: agape, eros, and phileo. But this word for love is really important to understand. In fact, I was reading a commentary about it, and I thought I'd just share with you what they said about this word. It says, this is a love of intelligence and purpose, of sacrifice and hard decisions. It is a willful love, a determined love that generously chooses for the interests of another. Agape, the noun form, speaks of a love that grows out of knowledge. It comes from knowing the true God in all of his greatness and all of his grace. And so Jesus is saying, as much as God has loved us in this way, willfully choosing that and proving it, now we know through his death, Jesus' death on the cross, in the same way you love him back. With your knowledge of his greatness, of his unending mercies, of the depths of his love, love him back with a willful, committed, intentional love. Love him with everything that you have, mind, heart, soul, strength, all of that. Love him. So that's the first part. And then he goes on and he says the second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. In some translations where it says the second is this, it actually says the second is like it. And that would be an even closer translation. Jesus is saying, look, as important as the first one is of loving the Lord this way, the second one is just as important. Love your neighbor as yourself. It's almost shocking that he would put those two together. As much as you love God, you should give that love to others. A willful, deep commitment kind of love. And so here we are, back at the whole conversation about purpose again. You see, what Jesus is offering here is really our purpose. A vertical relationship with God, where we love him with all that we are, and then a horizontal relationship with others, where we share that by loving our neighbor and serving them. Now, a lot of people might ask, okay, well, who's my neighbor? And even the Pharisees asked that, didn't they? Who's my neighbor? We're going to talk about that more specifically next week. But sometimes we say, well, you know, everybody's my neighbor. I love everybody. That's great. Jesus was talking about, though, a very specific kind of a person. He was saying, yeah, but you may love everybody and that's important, but you're going to start with this person. We start loving everyone by starting with the person closest to us. These people who live right around us. These people that are in our path every day. These are people that we would define as neighbor. And the ones that God has called us to reach out to and not to neglect in this life. And so really to say that everyone is our neighbor is to say no one's our neighbor. Now, let me just break it down to this for all of us here. Can you imagine if everybody in our church, at all sites, 1,200 people or thereabouts, if everybody took this notion seriously and literally began to get to know these people who live right around them, not just to know their name, but to know things about them, to know about their dreams and hopes, to know about their struggles, to build a relationship that maybe someday, you know, they come to you because they have needs and are struggling, or maybe they want to know about this God that you serve, or they want to know about this church that you go to. If that started happening all over town, what if every church, everybody in every church just started saying, I'm going to start with these people who live right here around me, and we're going to make that the beginning of my mission field, and we took that seriously. Can you imagine what would happen? I mean, you know, it's already been proven that the communities that literally make this happen, crime is less, there are less issues and problems and societal struggles. I mean, practically it makes sense, but spiritually it is the gospel. It is that place where we begin to do our gospel work in this world. So here's the deal, here's your challenge. This week, we're going to do A. This week, I challenge you to go out to that person whose name you don't know that lives right around you and find out what their name is. We're just going to start small. Don't make it weird. Don't come up to them and do some kind of Amway thing and have them all freaking out like, oh my gosh, why are you standing in front of me? What are you about to do? You telling me something? Anyway, we're not doing that. Hey, just catch them out grabbing their mail or, you know, cutting the grass or something and just, hey, how's it going? You know, I live 2 houses down. I know you've lived here for 15 years and I haven't met you, so I'm going to meet you today and see where that goes. Don't worry, I'm going to challenge you a lot more after this for the weeks that are coming. Then I want you to report back next week. No, I'm just kidding. We're not going to do that. But actually, I'm going to be doing this week, so I will be reporting back next week as to how I did, just so you know. Becky's here. She's going to hold me accountable to it. And we're going to just see where this goes over these next few weeks and see if God can do something in us and maybe even in this community. You up for that? There's a book out there in our book corner. It's called The Art of Neighboring. This is actually a book based on something that happened out in Denver, Colorado that changed that community. It was a group of pastors that got together and made it happen out there, kind of basing some of our ideas off of this. I encourage you to go pick it up, kind of give you some more details and ideas, and see if we can make this happen. So let's pray. God, we just thank you so much for the reminder this morning of the great commandment that before we do anything else in this life, two things need to be guiding us: love you with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then just as equally, loving our neighbor as ourselves. And God, so often it seems like we can get that first part right. We can come here to church and we can sing and worship and pray and we can read our Bible and we can do all these things and love you well, but sometimes we're not as good at just going next door and getting to know these people that live right around us and then serving them. And so, God, I'm just asking this morning that you would challenge every one of us in here with this great commandment that you've called us to open doors and help us to have the courage just to go right across there and shake a hand and introduce ourselves. But Lord, I pray for much more than that to happen, that seeds would be sown of the gospel of grace and mercy in this community, of genuine love and caring for one another, and knowing what's going on in each other's lives. And Lord, that over time, light would just shine very brightly here, and that your grace would fall on people. And so, God, this morning we just, we thank you for the reminder that you willfully, intentionally, committed, sacrificially loved each one of us here by sending your only Son to die on a cross. And that through him we have eternal life. So, God, we thank you for that gift in reaching your love right down here to us. So, Lord, this morning we put you at the highest place and say that we love you. In Jesus' name. Amen.